Hello, my name is Renner Carter, 27 years old. I am a nurse working at a public hospital in the suburbs of Oregon, where endless pine forests stretch out and the morning mist clings to the narrow roads like a thin veil. Here, time seems to slow down, and life carries the peaceful charm of a pastoral painting, but beneath that tranquility, I know there are stories far more complex. I live in a small apartment just big enough for a single bed, a worn wooden table, and a few family photos hanging on the wall. But if you ask me what family means, I won't talk about those who share my blood. To me, family is my grandfather, Thomas W. Hale, who raised me after I lost my mother and father in a car accident when I was 12. My mother, Emily Hale, was the youngest daughter of Thomas, the one he always said had the brightest smile in the house. I don't remember much about her, only vague fragments of memory. The faint scent of her perfume, her soft humming each night, and the warm embrace before I went to bed. My father, a construction engineer, was also someone my grandfather cherished, not just as a son-in-law, but as someone always ready to debate technical blueprints with him. But all of that vanished one rainy night when their car skidded off the highway leading into town. I was too young to fully grasp the pain of loss, only knowing that my world had collapsed and I became an orphaned boy, lost amid pitying gazes. My grandfather took me in. Thomas W. Hale, a former research engineer who once worked for the Department of Defense, with snow-white hair and piercing eyes that held a treasure trove of knowledge. He lived alone in an old wooden house at the end of a trail, surrounded by towering pines and a babbling brook. That house, worth nearly $2 million because of its vast land, was not something he cared about. "Renner, true value doesn't lie in land," he would say in his warm, steady voice, "but in what we leave behind for the world." I grew up in that house under his care. He was not just my grandfather, but also my teacher, my friend, and sometimes my entire world. He taught me how to hold a wrench, fix a radio, and be patient with things that seemed beyond repair. "Life is like a machine, Renner," he'd say, holding a small screw, his eyes twinkling. "Find the right piece and everything falls into place." The afternoons in his small workshop in the backyard, surrounded by tools and wires, are my fondest memories. He'd talk about his days at the Department of Defense, the inventions he dreamed of, and I'd sit there, soaking up every word, even if I didn't always understand. My bond with him wasn't just familial. It was a deep connection forged in the years I needed him most. When I went to college and later started working at the hospital, I made it a habit to visit him every week. No matter how exhausting the night shifts were or how the smell of antiseptic clung to my scrubs, I'd drive down those winding trails to see him. Sitting with him, listening to his stories, or making coffee together in his old kitchen, I felt like I was coming home. A safe place where I didn't have to hide my pain or fatigue. But my grandfather's family, my uncles and aunts, are a different story. He had 4 children, my mother Emily, who passed away, and the others, David, Linda, and Zachary. They were his biological children, but to me they were as distant as strangers. I don't understand why they were so different from him, as if their hearts belonged to a colder world where money and self-interest trumped family ties. David, the eldest, is a real estate businessman in Portland. He always showed up in expensive suits, a flashy watch glinting on his wrist, but his eyes were as cold as stone. I remember one time he came to the house with a stack of papers trying to convince Grandpa to sell the property for one of his projects. "You're old, Dad. What's the point of keeping this house?" he said, his voice flat but calculating. Grandpa just shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "David, you don't understand. This is more than just a house." I stood there watching David frown, and I knew he'd never grasp Grandpa's devotion. Linda, the second child, works at a law firm, always busy with meetings and business trips. She rarely visited Grandpa, only occasionally calling to ask perfunctory questions before hanging up. Once, she came to the house with an expensive bottle of wine as if to make up for her absence. But she only stayed 10 minutes before leaving with an excuse. I saw Grandpa watching her go, a fleeting sadness in his eyes, but he said nothing. I knew he was hurt, but he never showed it. Zachary, the youngest, was even worse. Nearing 40, he had nothing but complaints and dreams of getting rich quick. Every time he visited, he'd ask about the house, about the estate plan. "What are you leaving us, Dad?" he'd ask, half joking but with a greedy glint in his eyes. I saw Grandpa's gaze dim with disappointment. "Zachary's just lost," he told me after one of those visits. "He'll find his way someday." But I wasn't so sure. To me, Zachary, like David and Linda, seemed to see Grandpa only as a source of wealth, not as the father who had sacrificed his life for them. I was different. I was just a grandson, not his biological child, but I always felt I belonged to him more than anyone else. From college onward, I strove to be independent, not wanting to rely on him. I worked side jobs, earned scholarships, and later pulled long hospital shifts just to stand on my own 2 feet. But no matter how busy I was, I never forgot to visit him. Every time I stepped into that house, the smell of old wood and his brewed coffee made me feel at home. I remember one autumn afternoon when golden leaves covered the yard. Grandpa called me to the workshop holding a sketch with his scrawled but heartfelt handwriting, pointing to a strange device on the table. "This is a fall detection sensor," he said, his voice brimming with childlike excitement. "It'll save the elderly, Renner. One day it'll save thousands." I didn't fully understand, but I nodded, smiled, and helped him polish a piece of metal. At the time, I thought he was just dreaming, as he often did. I had no idea that dream would change everything. Those days passed peacefully, but I always had an uneasy feeling, as if a storm was quietly approaching. Grandpa was getting weaker, his steps slower, his voice occasionally trembling. I tried to convince him to see a doctor, but he just waved me off. "I'm fine, Renner. I still have work to do." I didn't know then that he was keeping a secret that I, his only grandson, was the only one he wanted to share it with. One Tuesday morning, the storm I had been dreading in my heart finally struck. That day, as the fog still shrouded the road leading to the hospital, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I frowned, hesitant, but a sinking feeling urged me to answer. A woman's voice came through, trembling and urgent. It was Clara, Grandpa's neighbor. "Renner, it's Thomas. He fell at home. Come quickly." My heart seemed to stop. I threw my scrub top into the locker, didn't even bother reporting to my supervisor, and raced to my car. The road to his house had never felt so long. The pine trees blurred past my window like ghostly shadows, and I could only mutter to myself, "Grandpa will be okay. He has to be okay." But when I arrived, the sight before me froze me in place. The front door of his house was wide open. Clara stood there, her face pale, clutching her phone. Inside, Grandpa lay motionless on the living room floor next to the old armchair he loved to sit in. His face was ashen, his lips tinged blue, and his eyes were closed as if lost in a deep dream. I knelt beside him, checking his pulse, but it was so faint it was barely there. "Grandpa, wake up," I whispered, my hands trembling as I touched his chest. No response. The ambulance arrived minutes later, but each second dragged like a century. I sat beside him in the ambulance, gripping his hand, cold and fragile like a dried leaf. The paramedics worked frantically, but the looks they exchanged held no promise. "Stroke," one of them said, his voice flat. "Critical condition. We'll do our best." At the hospital, they rushed him straight to the ICU. I stood in the hallway staring through the glass door where machines fought to keep him alive. Dr. Harris, the head of the department and someone I'd worked with for 3 years, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Renner, he's in acute multi-organ failure. His chances of survival, less than 10%. You need to prepare yourself." I nodded, but my mind screamed one thought. No, my grandfather can't leave me like this. The hospital required a family member to sign financial responsibility forms, a cold, mandatory procedure. I pulled out my phone and called David, Linda, and Zachary. "Uncle, Aunt, Grandpa's critical," I said, my voice choking. "Please come now." David replied curtly. "I'm in a meeting. I'll come when it's over." Linda said, "I'm out of town. I can fly back tomorrow." Zachary just mumbled, "Yeah, I'll see." I hung up, feeling like the world was turning its back on me, and on him. They came, but not out of love. David arrived first, still in his sleek suit, but his eyes weren't on the ICU. He stood in a corner of the hallway, scrolling through his phone as if his father's dying was just an inconvenience. Linda showed up the next morning with a cheap bouquet of flowers, but lingered outside the door, too afraid to step in. Zachary arrived last, his hair disheveled, wearing a crumpled t-shirt, and the first thing he said to me was, "Is he awake yet? Did he mention anything about a will?" I stared at him, my heart constricting. They were his children, my uncles and aunt. But how could they be so heartless? When the doctor asked for someone to sign the financial responsibility forms, David crossed his arms and shook his head. "He's old, Renner. Prolonging this just costs money. I'm not signing." Linda nodded, her voice soft but cold. "If Dad wakes up, we'll figure it out. For now, let him go peacefully." Zachary gave a hollow laugh. "I don't have the money to sign." I stood there, stunned, as if someone had slapped me. They were my family, sharing the same Hale blood as me, but they were ready to abandon him, their father, our grandfather, for money. I couldn't take it. I walked to the reception desk, my hands shaking as I picked up the pen and signed my name on the forms. "If no one else will stay, I will," I said, my voice breaking, my eyes stinging. "Not for the house, not for money, but because he's my family." The hospital staffer looked at me, her eyes a mix of surprise and sympathy. "Are you sure, Renner? This is a big bill." I nodded, though I knew I didn't have the money. I had some savings, a few friends who might lend me money, and the determination to work double shifts to cover it. But I didn't care. I just knew I couldn't let him go alone. The days that followed were a nightmare. I scrambled everywhere, calling friends, pawning my old car, and working myself to exhaustion. Some nights I stood in the ICU, my vision blurred from lack of sleep, but I still smiled at patients so no one would see me breaking. After shifts, I sat by Grandpa's bedside for hours, massaging his frail hands and reading to him, even though he was unconscious. I read the old technical books he loved, hoping somewhere in his coma he could hear my voice. "Grandpa, I'm here," I whispered, holding his hand tightly. "I'm not going anywhere." The doctor started looking at me with pity. One day, Dr. Harris pulled me aside, his voice grave. "Renner, I know you're trying, but he's not conscious anymore. You're fighting for something nearly hopeless. You need to think about yourself too." I gave a faint smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you, doctor. But I'm not doing this for hope. I'm doing it because my grandfather deserves it." I thought of my mother, the stories he told me about her, the way he held me when she was gone. He hadn't abandoned me, and now I wouldn't abandon him. I don't know where I found the strength to keep going. Maybe it was from the memories of him. The afternoons he taught me to fix radios, the look in his eyes when he spoke of his grand dreams. Maybe it was the Hale blood in me, the love he gave me, his grandson whom he treated like a son. I couldn't let go. Not now. Not ever. Then one night as I sat by his bedside, something miraculous happened. I was reading a page from a book, my voice hoarse from exhaustion, when I saw his finger twitch. I looked up, my heart pounding. His eyes, though weak, cracked open. His dry, cracked lips moved, and I leaned in, close enough to feel his faint breath. "R5, Alpha, 9Z, he whispered, his voice so faint it was barely audible. I grabbed the notebook from my pocket, scribbling down the strange sequence, my hands trembling. "Grandpa, what are you saying?" "I'm here," I called, but his eyes closed again and he slipped deeper into his coma. I clutched the notebook, staring at the scrawled words, R5 Alpha 9Z. What did it mean? A code? A message? Or just the delirious mutterings of a dying man? I didn't know, but a jolt ran through me as if he'd just handed me the final piece of a puzzle. I tucked the notebook away, my heart heavy but flickering with a spark of hope. It was the last thing he gave me, the grandson he trusted, and I swore I'd find its meaning. The days after, I stayed by his side, though my body was near collapse. I dozed off in the chair by his bed, ate instant noodles in the break room, and tried not to think about the mounting hospital bills. David, Linda, and Zachary didn't show up again. They called a few times, asking empty questions like, "How's he doing?" But none of them came. I knew they were waiting for him to die, for the $2 million house, for the money. They were my uncles and aunt, but they were stranger than strangers. And me, I was just waiting for a miracle, no matter how faint. Every night I opened the notebook, rereading R5 Alpha 9Z. I tried to recall the times he talked about his work, his sketches, the old computer in his study. Was he trying to tell me something? Did he know his time was running out and this was his way of passing on one final thing? I had no answers, but I knew I couldn't give up. Not for me, but for him. The grandfather who gave me a family, a purpose, and a reason to live. The days that followed were like a fragile thread stretched taut between hope and despair. I lived in an endless loop, night shifts at the hospital, hours by Grandpa's bedside, and sleepless nights staring at the cryptic sequence in my notebook. I tried to find meaning, sifting through every memory of him, from the afternoons he taught me to fix radios to the times he spoke of his dream to save lives. But the code R5 Alpha 9Z remained an unsolved riddle, and each day I felt him slipping further away like a boat lost in the fog. Dr. Harris checked on him daily, but his expression grew heavier with each visit. "Renner, his condition isn't improving," he said, his voice low. "We've done all we can. You should prepare yourself." I nodded, but inside I was screaming. Prepare myself? How could I prepare to lose the grandfather who pulled me out of the darkness when my parents died? How could I let go when he was still here, even if just by a faint breath? Then one night, as I sat by his bedside, holding his hand and reading from an old technical book, I noticed his breathing slow. The heart monitor's beeps grew longer, more sporadic. I shot to my feet, my heart pounding. "Grandpa, don't go," I called, my voice breaking. Nurses rushed in, followed by Dr. Harris, but I stood there, helpless, watching them try to resuscitate him. The hum of machines, the urgent calls, all blurred into a nightmare. Then the monitor fell silent. A long, flat line appeared on the screen. Dr. Harris turned to me, his eyes full of regret. "Renner, he's gone." I don't know how long I stood there, only that the world around me seemed to collapse. I knelt by the bed, clutching his hand, now cold and still. "Grandpa," I whispered, tears falling onto the back of his hand. "I'm sorry. I tried my best." No one in the room spoke. The nurses quietly left, leaving me with him, with a pain that tore through my chest. Thomas W. Hale, the man who gave me a home, a purpose, was gone forever. And I was the only one there, the grandson he loved, while his children, my uncles and aunt, were nowhere to be found. I quietly handled his funeral arrangements. I called David, Linda, and Zachary to break the news, my voice steady despite my shattered heart. "Grandpa's gone," I said. David responded with a curt, "I see. When's the funeral?" Linda sighed over the phone. "I'll try to make arrangements." Zachary immediately asked, "Is there a will?" I hung up, unwilling to hear more. They didn't ask how he passed, didn't ask how I'd stayed by his side. They only cared about what he left behind, the house, the money, the assets. I wondered how they could call themselves his children when they weren't there in his final moments. I returned to his wooden house, still filled with the scent of coffee and old wood, the place that had once been my sanctuary. I packed his belongings one by one, as if trying to hold on to fading memories. The armchair he loved, the half-read technical book, the dusty old desktop computer in his study. Everything made me choke up. I sat at the computer staring at its dark screen when R5 Alpha 9Z flashed through my mind. I opened my notebook, looked at the scrawled code, and a thought sparked. Could this be the key? Was he trying to tell me something? With a flicker of hope, I turned on the computer. The screen prompted for a password. I took a deep breath and typed R5 Alpha 9Z. 1 second, 2 seconds, then the screen lit up. I nearly stopped breathing. The computer unlocked, revealing a folder named "If You're Reading This." My heart raced. I clicked it and a cascade of files appeared. Detailed technical drawings, circuit schematics, documents about a medical device for the elderly, a fall detection sensor with early intervention capabilities. I scrolled through, my eyes blurring with tears. This was his dream, the one he said would save thousands. At the bottom of the folder was a short audio file. I clicked it and his voice came through, weak but clear. "Renner, if you're hearing this, it means you didn't give up. Finish it, for me, for your mother, and for those who need it." I sat there, frozen, tears streaming down my face. Grandpa knew. He knew his time was running out and he chose me, his grandson, to entrust with his dream. Not David, not Linda, not Zachary, but me, the one who stayed when everyone else turned away. I gripped the mouse, my heart flooded with a mix of emotions. Grief for losing him, but also a fierce determination not to let him down. The funeral was held on a drizzly day in suburban Oregon, in a small church nestled among lush pine trees. I stood before Grandpa's casket wearing a borrowed threadbare suit, staring at the white flowers draped over the wooden lid. The scent of incense mingled with the damp air, creating a heavy atmosphere, as if the weight of the world rested on my shoulders. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I just stood there, silent, clutching the USB drive containing the data from his computer, the only tangible thing left of him besides the burning memories in my heart. David, Linda, and Zachary finally showed up. They arrived late, stepping into the church in their expensive attire as if attending a social event rather than bidding farewell to their father. David, in a costly black suit, wiped his eyes with a silk handkerchief, but his gaze was cold, devoid of grief. Linda, in a tight black dress, sobbed dramatically, yet I noticed her glance at her watch 3 times in 10 minutes. Zachary, as usual, was disheveled, standing in a corner of the church, furtively checking his phone. They played the part of mourners, but I saw clearly their tears weren't real. They weren't there when he needed them, didn't hold his hand in his final days, didn't hear the last words he whispered. They didn't deserve to call him father. I stood by the casket, delivering the eulogy with a trembling voice. Thomas W. Hale was a grandfather, a father, a teacher. He taught me about perseverance, love, and never giving up on a dream. He was the light in my darkest days, and I will forever be grateful to him. I looked out at the sparse crowd, a few neighbors, some of Grandpa's old colleagues, and his 3 children, my uncles and aunt. David stood with his arms crossed, his expression blank. Linda bowed her head, but I knew she was counting the seconds until the ceremony ended. Zachary smirked as if mocking my words. I clenched my fists, suppressing my anger. They didn't understand him, never would. After the service, everyone moved to a small room adjacent to the church, where Grandpa's lawyer, Mr. Brandon, was waiting to announce the estate. I sat in a corner, the USB drive in my pocket, feeling like a heavy weight, reminding me of my promise to him. David, Linda, and Zachary sat in the front row, their eyes gleaming as Mr. Brandon opened the file. As per the law, since Thomas W. Hale did not leave a notarized will, Mr. Brandon said evenly, his estate, including the house valued at $2 million, will be divided equally among his 3 children, David Hale, Linda Hale, and Zachary Hale. David smiled, a triumphant grin. Linda nodded, her lips pursed as if hiding her delight. Zachary couldn't contain himself, exclaiming, "Awesome! I knew it. $2 million split 3 ways, enough for a fresh start." They shook hands, chatting excitedly as if they'd just closed a lucrative deal. I sat there, silent, feeling like an outsider in my own family. They were my uncles and aunt, bearers of the Hale blood, but they were more distant than the patients I cared for at the hospital. David turned to me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Renner, you tried to save the old man, but maybe you should have saved your money instead. How much did you spend on hospital bills? 20,000? 30,000? Now you get nothing." Linda chuckled, and Zachary patted my shoulder as if consoling me, but his eyes were full of mockery. "Don't be sad, kid, you're young. Work a few years and you'll make it back." I didn't respond. I just looked at them, the people who called my grandfather father but never stood by him, never understood his dreams. In my hand, the USB drive seemed to burn, reminding me I had something they'd never have: his passion and his trust. I left the church, walking into the rain. The cold droplets soaked through my suit, but I didn't feel alone. I felt him still there in my heart, in the voice from the recording. "Renner, finish it." I knew I didn't need the house, didn't need the money. I had something far more valuable: his true legacy. Something David, Linda, and Zachary would never comprehend. The rain kept falling, heavier now, as if trying to wash away the bitterness in my heart. I gripped the USB drive in my pocket, feeling its edges like a reminder that I was carrying my grandfather's dream. The grandfather who gave me a family, a purpose. I didn't have much: a small apartment, a modest nurse's salary, and a lingering hospital debt. But I had his trust, and I was determined to turn the blueprints on that USB into reality, no matter the cost. In the days after the funeral, I embarked on a journey I never thought I could handle. I wasn't an engineer like Grandpa, just a 27-year-old nurse more accustomed to caring for patients than reading technical schematics. But every time I opened the USB and saw his detailed circuit diagrams and notes, I heard his voice: "Just be patient and everything will fall into place." I spent hours each night after my shifts, sitting under the dim light of my apartment, studying every line he'd left behind. Terms like biometric rhythms, early intervention, and multi-point sensors overwhelmed me, but I didn't give up. I couldn't let him down. I reached out to Tom, an engineer friend from college, and sent him the USB's contents. A few days later, he called back, his voice brimming with excitement. "Renner, do you realize what you're holding? This is the most advanced fall detection system I've ever seen. If completed, it could save thousands of elderly people living alone. Your grandfather was a genius." I smiled through the phone, tears welling up. "I know," I said, my voice catching, "and I want to make it real, for him." Tom connected me with the Oregon Institute of Technology, where Professor Margaret Stein, a medical technology expert, agreed to meet me. I arrived at the institute on a cold morning, carrying the USB, Grandpa's notebook, and a heart full of determination. Professor Stein, an older woman with sharp eyes, sat across from me in her book-filled office, surrounded by device models. My hands trembled as I handed her the files. She flipped through the blueprints, read his notes, and looked up, her eyes gleaming. "Renner, this is a masterpiece. An early intervention system based on biometric rhythms. No one's done this at this level. Who was your grandfather?" I told her about Thomas W. Hale, about the afternoons he taught me to fix radios, about his dream to help the elderly live safer lives. I shared his final days, the cryptic R5 Alpha 9Z, and how he chose me, his grandson, to carry on his work. Professor Stein listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she smiled. "You're not just bringing a design, but a story. I'll help you." She introduced me to a venture fund specializing in medical products, but they required a detailed presentation and a working prototype. I didn't know where to start. I had no money, no team, just the blueprints and a promise to Grandpa. But Professor Stein didn't abandon me. She connected me with a group of engineering students at the institute, eager to join the project. "We'll help you build the prototype," a student named Anna said, "but you need to tell us exactly what you want. This is your grandfather's legacy, right?" I nodded, feeling a weight lift slightly. We worked day and night in the institute's lab. I learned to read circuit diagrams, solder wires, and test sensors. Each small step was a victory, but also a reminder of Grandpa, of how he patiently worked on tiny screws in his workshop. Some nights I collapsed from exhaustion, falling asleep at the lab table. But his voice from the recording kept pushing me forward. "Renner, finish it." I wasn't doing this for money or fame. I was doing it for him, for my mother, Emily Hale, his youngest daughter, and for the lonely elderly he wanted to protect. After 3 grueling months, We completed the first prototype, a compact wrist-worn device that could detect fall risks based on biometric rhythms and send an emergency signal within seconds. When I turned it on and saw the indicator light up for the first time, I broke down in tears. "Grandpa, I did it," I whispered as if he were standing there smiling at me. Professor Stein patted my shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Renner. Now you need to bring it to the world." I worked with the venture fund to prepare a presentation. They were people in suits talking about profits and markets, but I spoke only of Grandpa, his dream, the lives he wanted to save. I wasn't sure if I'd convince them, but when the meeting ended, one investor, Claire, took my hand. "You have your grandfather's heart," she said. "We'll fund the trials." I nodded, tears streaming down. I was getting closer to fulfilling my promise to him. With Professor Stein's and the fund's support, I filed a patent listing the co-inventors as Thomas W. Hale and Renner Carter. I wanted his name forever tied to this invention, just as he'd been tied to me through the years I grew up. Standing in the Oregon Institute of Technology's lab, watching the fall detection prototype light up for the first time, I felt like Grandpa was there smiling at me. I wasn't doing this for money or fame. I was doing it for him, the grandfather who gave me a family, a purpose, and for the lonely elderly he wanted to protect. But I didn't expect that. Just as the first light of success flickered, the shadow of greed would loom, bringing my uncles and aunt back into the picture. The news of the invention spread faster than I could have imagined. A local newspaper, the Oregon Chronicle, published a short article titled, "Young Nurse Completes Life-Saving Device from Late Engineer's Unreleased Design." The piece recounted my journey, Thomas W. Hale, and the fall detection sensor now being tested at a nursing home. I hadn't sought attention, but when the article went out, I received dozens of calls from investors, engineers, and strangers eager to learn more about the device. Professor Stein smiled as she watched me fumble through phone calls. "Renner, you've started something big," she said. "Brace yourself, it won't be easy." She was right. Just days later, David, Linda, and Zachary showed up unannounced at the door of my small apartment. I'd just returned from work, still in my scrubs, exhausted from a long shift. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, all three stood there, their eyes cold and predatory, like wolves circling prey. David, in his sleek suit, spoke first, his voice dripping with authority. "Renner, we need to talk. Now." I invited them in, though unease churned in my gut. My tiny apartment suddenly felt claustrophobic with their presence. David sat in a chair, arms crossed, staring at me like I was on trial. Linda stood by the window, a forced smile on her lips, while Zachary paced, his eyes suspicious. "We read the article," David said icily. "What are you doing with our father's work? An invention? A life-saving device? That's family property, Renner. You have no right to keep it to yourself." I looked at them, feeling like I was facing strangers. "It's not property," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "It's Grandpa's dream. He entrusted it to me, not you." Zachary scoffed, stepping closer. "You think you're smarter than us, kid? You sneak off with his work, file a patent, and now want to keep it all. We're his children. We have rights." Linda chimed in, her voice saccharine but calculated. "Renner, if Dad left an invention, it should be shared equally. We're family, aren't we?" I stared at her, my heart heavy. Family? They called it family when none of them were there in his final days. When I scrambled to pay hospital bills, held his hand in the ICU, and heard him whisper R5 Alpha 9Z. They weren't there. I clenched my fists, feeling the USB in my pocket. "Grandpa chose me," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "He gave me the password, not you. You weren't there when he needed you, didn't sign the hospital forms, didn't care how long he lived. You have no right to demand anything." David shot to his feet, his eyes blazing. "How dare you speak to us like that? Who do you think you are, Renner? A broke nurse trying to steal my father's intellect? We'll sue you and you'll lose everything." The room crackled with tension. Zachary stepped forward, jabbing a finger at me. "Hand over the USB or you'll regret it." I stood my ground, unflinching. "Sue me if you want," I said. "But I'm not giving you anything. This is Grandpa's legacy, and I'll protect it." They stormed out, leaving threats hanging in the air. I shut the door, leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. I knew this fight was far from over. They wouldn't give up, and I had to be stronger than ever. I immediately contacted Mr. Jenkins, an intellectual property lawyer. I told him about the confrontation, the article, and my uncle's and aunt's intent to sue. Jenkins listened intently, then said, "Renner, your grandfather's recording is strong evidence of his intent. He entrusted the invention to you, and you filed the patent legally. But your family could sue, claiming the invention is part of Thomas's estate. You need to prepare." The following days were spent fortifying my position. With Professor Stein's help, I compiled legal documentation providing every piece of evidence: the recording, Grandpa's notebook, sketches, and research logs from the Institute team. I also informed the venture fund of the situation. Claire, the lead investor, reassured me. "Renner, we believe in you and this project. Don't let your family distract you. Focus on getting the device to market." Meanwhile, David moved quickly. He hired a renowned Portland lawyer, Harold Vance, who specialized in estate disputes. A week later, I received a letter from Vance's firm demanding I surrender all invention data and share intellectual property rights with Thomas's 3 children. The letter stated, "Thomas W. Hale left no will designating ownership of the invention to Renner Carter. Therefore, the intellectual property belongs to the legal heirs, David Hale, Linda Hale, and Zachary Hale." Reading it, I felt a stab in my heart. They didn't just want the invention, they wanted to erase my and Grandpa's mark on this dream. I met Jenkins at his office, bringing the USB and all documents. "Renner, this will be a tough fight," he said, "but you have the advantage. Thomas's clear intent. The recording is key. We'll prove he chose you, not them." I nodded, though anxiety gnawed at me. I wasn't afraid of losing the invention. I was afraid of failing Grandpa, of breaking the promise I'd made to myself. While awaiting the trial, I continued working with the research team to refine the device. Tests at the nursing home exceeded expectations. In the first month, the sensor prevented 3 serious accidents. An elderly man, Mr. Wilson, grasped my hand after being saved, his eyes teary. "You don't know how much this means," he said. "I live alone and I thought no one cared." I smiled, thinking of Grandpa. "Someone cared, sir," I said, "and he made this device." Each small success reminded me I was on the right path. But the pressure from my family grew. David spread rumors, telling friends and acquaintances I'd stolen Grandpa's intellect. Linda called investors, trying to convince them I was untrustworthy. Zachary publicly attacked me on social media, calling me a thief of family legacy. Reading their words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. They were my uncles and aunt, bearers of Hale blood, yet they were ready to destroy me for something they didn't deserve. I didn't retaliate. Instead, I focused on the Hale Foundation, a nonprofit I founded to carry on Grandpa's mission. I wanted this device to reach those who needed it most, not for profit, but for his vision. I worked with engineers to improve the device, lower production costs, and ensure wide distribution. Professor Stein became my lead advisor, connecting me with healthcare organizations and nursing homes across Oregon. The trial took place on a frigid winter morning. I entered the courtroom in my borrowed threadbare suit, facing David, Linda, and Zachary, who sat across with their high-priced lawyer. Vance argued that the invention was Thomas's property, and without a clear will, it belonged to his 3 children. He called me an unqualified nurse who exploited Thomas's trust to seize intellectual property. Jenkins rose, his voice calm but sharp. He presented Grandpa's recording, clearly entrusting the invention to me. He submitted the notebook, emails with Professor Stein, and nursing home test results. "Renner Carter is not just Thomas W. Hale's grandson," Jenkins said. "He was the only one by Thomas's side in his final days, the only one Thomas trusted to fulfill his dream. This invention isn't property, it's a legacy, and Thomas chose Renner to inherit it." I glanced at the row where David, Linda, and Zachary sat. David's face was flushed, arms crossed. Linda bowed her head, but her lips were tightly pressed. Zachary glared at me, eyes full of resentment. I didn't look away. I stared back and said clearly, "Grandpa left this to me because I stayed. None of you asked how long he lived. You don't deserve his legacy." The judge delivered the verdict after 3 days. He ruled that the recording was clear evidence of Thomas's intent and the patent belonged to me as co-inventor with Thomas. David, Linda, and Zachary had no claim to the intellectual property. As the verdict was read, I heard Linda sobbing, but I knew those weren't tears of regret. They'd come too late, and now they had nothing. I left the courtroom feeling a weight lift, but I knew the journey wasn't over. The Hale Foundation was growing, and Grandpa's device was saving more lives every day. I would continue his mission, not just for him, but for the lonely elderly he always wanted to protect. David, Linda, and Zachary could keep the house, but I had something far more valuable: his true legacy and the certainty that I'd done right. I am Renner Carter, Thomas W. Hale's grandson, and I will prove that family isn't just blood. It's those who stay, fight, and sacrifice for what's right. After the legal victory at the trial, I poured my heart into the Hale Foundation, working with Professor Stein, the engineering team, and the venture fund to expand testing of the fall detection sensor. In the first month, the device saved 3 people at a nursing home in suburban Portland. A month later, that number rose to 15. Stories began to spread. An elderly woman saved from a fall in her bathroom. An elderly man rushed to the hospital in time thanks to the device's emergency signal. Each story felt like Grandpa smiling, his eyes twinkling as he spoke of his dream to save lives in his small workshop. I continued working at the hospital, but now every shift was an opportunity to think about improving the device. I observed elderly patients, listened to their stories, and jotted down new ideas. If the sensor could detect abnormal blood pressure too, I told Anna, the engineering student on our team, we could save even more lives. Anna nodded, her eyes lighting up. One afternoon, I received a letter from the nursing home where the device was being tested. They invited me to a gathering with patients and families who had benefited from the sensor. I arrived, still in my nurse's scrubs, feeling awkward standing before a crowd. An elderly woman, Evelyn, took my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "You don't know what this means to me," she said. "I live alone, and I was always afraid I'd fall with no one to know. Now I'm not scared anymore." I hugged her, tears streaming down my face. "It's not my work," I whispered. "It's my grandfather's, Thomas W. Hale." The event made local news. This time, not only the Oregon Chronicle, but also a Portland TV station came to interview me. I wasn't used to camera lights or microphones in my face, but I tried to talk about Grandpa, about the engineer who spent his life dreaming, the grandfather who gave me a family when I lost everything. "This device isn't mine," I said on camera. "It's my grandfather's legacy, and I'm just carrying on his work." When the interview aired, the Hale Foundation received hundreds of calls from nursing homes, hospitals, and even international organizations wanting to partner on distributing the device. Grandpa's dream was spreading further than I'd ever imagined. One day I learned that David, Linda, and Zachary had decided to sell Grandpa's wooden house. They split the proceeds 3 ways, each pocketing nearly $700,000 without ever consulting me. I wasn't surprised, but my heart still ached. That house wasn't just property, it was where I grew up, where Grandpa taught me to fix radios, where I felt his love. I thought it was gone forever until I came across a listing from a real estate agent. The buyer for Grandpa's house had backed out at the last minute, and my uncles and aunt were now listing it below market value. I knew this was my chance to reclaim the house filled with memories of Grandpa and me. I didn't have much money, so I enlisted Jenkins to help me secure a bank loan. In the end, I bought the house, not to own it, but to preserve Grandpa's memory. When I stepped inside as its owner for the first time, I broke down in tears. The smell of old wood, the faint trace of coffee, it was all still there, as if he'd never left. I decided to live there in his house, not to show off, but to feel him closer every day. I moved in, keeping everything as he'd left it. The old armchair, the bookshelf full of technical manuals, the small workshop in the backyard. I spent evenings in the workshop, working on new blueprints, refining the device. I didn't live lavishly. I didn't need to. I just needed this house, where I felt Grandpa beside me, guiding my every step. The Hale Foundation grew stronger. With the venture fund's support, we scaled up production, lowering costs so the device could reach low-income individuals. I worked with engineers to add features like stroke alerts and heart rhythm monitoring. Each report of a life saved echoed Grandpa's voice. "Renner, finish it." I wasn't doing this for fame, but for people like Evelyn and Wilson, the lonely elderly Grandpa wanted to protect. I began hosting workshops at nursing homes, sharing Grandpa's story and the Hale Foundation's mission. I wasn't a great speaker, but I spoke from the heart. My grandfather believed no one should live in fear, I told the elderly and their families. He wanted everyone to have a chance to live safely, even if they're alone. Those words weren't just mine. They were his, passed through me, his grandson carrying the Hale blood. One day, I received a letter from an international elderly care organization. They wanted to include our device in a global program, distributing it to developing countries. I sat in Grandpa's workshop reading the letter and broke into tears. "Grandpa, I did it," I whispered. "Your dream is reaching the world." I felt him there, in the wooden house, in every blueprint, in every device shipped out. Since the trial, David, Linda, and Zachary hadn't contacted me. I heard they used the house money for their own ventures. David expanded his real estate business. Linda bought a luxury condo in Seattle, and Zachary, as usual, squandered his share and fell back into debt. They didn't ask about the Hale Foundation, didn't care about the lives saved, didn't mention Grandpa. To them, he was just a source of wealth, and when that ran dry, they turned away. I no longer felt anger toward them. I only felt pity that they missed the chance to understand Grandpa, to grasp his true value. They could have the house, the money, but they didn't have his legacy, which I, his grandson, was honored to inherit. I thought of my mother, Emily Hale, his youngest daughter, and wondered if she'd be proud of me. I hoped so, just as I knew Grandpa was. One spring afternoon, I held a small ceremony at the wooden house to mark the first anniversary of Grandpa's passing. I invited Clara, his neighbor, Professor Stein, Tom, and a few people from the nursing home. We stood in the yard under the pine trees he loved, and I placed a small plaque in front of the house. "Home of Thomas W. Hale, where the dream to save lives began." I didn't say much, only thanked everyone for helping me make his legacy real. But looking at the plaque, I felt him there, smiling at me. I continued living simply, working at the hospital, running the Hale Foundation, and improving the device. I didn't need fame or recognition. I just needed to know I was doing right, by Grandpa, by my mother, and by myself. Each day I stepped into his workshop, turned on the computer, and worked just as he had. I felt him beside me, not as a memory, but as a flame, burning forever within me. Sitting in Grandpa's small workshop under the dim glow of a lamp, I often reflect on my journey. From an orphaned boy who lost his parents in a car accident, I found family in my grandfather, Thomas W. Hale, who not only raised me but taught me how to live. I was once seen as an ordinary nurse, a kid with nothing but passion. But now I am the inheritor of Grandpa's legacy. Not the $2 million house, not tangible wealth, but his dream, his trust, and his philosophy of life. I've learned that true value lies not in what we possess, but in what we leave behind for the world. Grandpa left behind the Hale Sensor, the Hale Foundation, and most importantly, a lesson. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stay when everyone else turns away. I think of David, Linda, and Zachary, Grandpa's biological children, my uncles and aunt. They were family by blood, but they chose to abandon him, choosing money over kinship. I, his grandson, with nothing but love for him, chose to stay. I signed the hospital's financial responsibility forms, held his hand in his final moments, and fought to protect his legacy. Family, I realize, doesn't come automatically from blood. It's proven through actions, through sacrifice, through the times we choose to stand for what's right, even when the world turns its back. I want to share that message with everyone, especially young people like me who felt lost in their own families. Don't be afraid to do what's right, even if no one acknowledges it. Don't fear fighting for what you believe in, even if it means facing those closest to you. Kindness is never wasted. Sometimes it's the greatest reward. I found my reward. Not money, not fame, but the knowledge that I made Grandpa proud, that I brought his dream to the world. The Hale Foundation is now an international organization with branches in 5 countries and thousands of devices distributed monthly. I still run it from Grandpa's wooden house where I feel closest to him. I work with engineers to develop new devices, not just fall detection sensors, but remote health monitoring systems, emergency connectivity tools, and apps to support independent living for the elderly. Each new project is a tribute to him, a way to keep his flame burning forever. I still work as a nurse despite the growing demands of the Hale Foundation. I love the feeling of caring for patients, holding their hands, hearing their stories. It makes me feel like I'm continuing Grandpa's work in my own way. I live simply, needing no extravagance. Each morning I brew coffee, sit in the kitchen, and look out at the small creek. I think of Grandpa, of my mother, and of the people I've never met but who were saved by his device. I think of my journey, from an orphaned boy to the heir of a genius engineer's legacy. If you're reading this story, I want you to remember: choose what's right, even if no one acknowledges it. Fight for what you believe in, even if it means facing those closest to you. Family isn't just those who share your blood. They're the ones who stay, hold your hand when you're weak, and trust you when the world turns away. Kindness, however small, has the power to change the world. I learned that from my grandfather, Thomas W. Hale, and I hope you find your own flame to light the path ahead. I am Renner Carter, Thomas W. Hale's grandson, and this is my story. A story of kinship, loyalty, and a legacy that will live on forever.